Hello and welcome to the interview on France 24. Our guest today is Peter Maurer. He's the chair of the International Red Cross Committee. He's with us from Geneva. Thank you, Mr. Maurer. Thanks for having me with you. You're just coming back from a visit to Syria. 11 years after the beginning of the conflict, there was the pandemic, then the Ukraine, which attracted attention, and the funds from the international community. What is the situation in Syria? The situation in Syria, generally speaking, remains very difficult because the effects of the conflict, the displacements are very acute today, the way they were 2, 3, or 4 years ago. So nothing has really changed in the general picture of the situation for the people in Syria. The infrastructures have been destroyed. The pandemic had its impact. The Lebanese crisis, tightly linked economically to Syria, made it so that the country is almost in a free fall of the social services. And we're facing today topics, issues, humanitarian issues, which are even more acute than they were during the activity of the military that we experienced at the beginning of the crisis. Are the consequences of the war on the Ukraine, as we can see the tremendous rise of the price of energy and of the food, is it really hitting hard the Syria, which is already weakened? For the time being, I wouldn't say so, because many donors are keeping the right direction and are supporting us on activities in other places in the country, and budgets for this year have already been approved. I rather fear that in the medium and long term, we might have financing effects, and also at the same time, those financing effects will take place when the crisis of the services, of the public services in Syria, will have grown even more than what we experienced until today. I think we try and we go and have activities, important activities. We need to start also a new phase to re-establish a minimum of the services in water, in health, and other social services, because in the long run, you cannot deal with a country like Syria only in the emergency with the water tracking and other forms of support which are not relevant. You met with Bashar al-Assad. Is he aware of the situation of the country? We may think that 11 years later, he thinks he will remain for quite a long time. Is this changing his perception of the vision in Syria? I had the feeling of a president who is very aware of the international environment and of the troubles and the pressures exerted by those pressures on Syria. I would say he is really grateful for the humanitarian work and crystal clear in his vision that things cannot go on that way. As you have seen, the Syrian president recently stated a pardon. We have to wait and see if this pardon will be implemented and it will be translated in the liberation of people who are detained currently. I have the feeling that this pardon can be regarded also as an answer, indirect answer, to the pressures that countries like Syria is experiencing today in the attention competition on the humanitarian crisis we're facing. So, from your discussion with him, you think there's a better listening and some more flexibility that didn't exist previously. Until now, it was a flat no. We hope so, certainly, that the cooperations we have started already could be widened, especially with populations and regions in Syria where we had no access or not enough access. And this trip was especially important right now in order to, as we can say, widen our operational surface in the northeast, the northwest, in other areas of Syria, but also regarding the population whose whereabouts were lost, for the reunification of the families, all the questions that the Syrian populations is asking the humanitarian operators like the ICRC, and people coming to us ask for some clarification about their family members, and I hope there will be a widened space, as well as I hope that the space will be widened for the humanitarian assistance, which is so important today. You visited a camp called Al-Hol, located in the northeast of Syria, under control of the Kurd forces, with more than 56,000 people, two-thirds made of women and children, families linked, closer or not, to ISIS, but also Western families. It's your third visit there. What is the situation in this Al-Hol camp? I'd say three things. On the one hand, I've been impressed by the work of some humanitarian agencies, including ICRC, to improve the situation in the camp. It is remarkable, given the situation and the difficult environment. Number two, I regret to say that in spite of all those efforts, enough isn't done to have an environment that would be acceptable for the population which are there. It's totally unacceptable that children and tens of thousands of children would experience this toughness of a camp right in the middle of the desert, and who, I mean, it's an environment which is so unfavorable to the development of children. It is unacceptable for a situation. And thirdly, I think, as I have said in other occasions, it is deplorable that the international community, in spite of all the efforts, is not doing enough to deliver a minimum of rule of law, of transparency about the status of those women and those children, not enough efforts to really encourage the returns from the camp, or to come up to conduct legal processes with those who perpetrated crimes, or to liberate those who are detained for 3 years without trial and without any legal proceedings, which are absolutely necessary. France is one of the countries which is repatriating the less people from Al-Hol. I will not list now those who are not good at repatriation. What I say is I'm deploring that in spite of the efforts, there are still 56,000 people who are still there, 70% children, women, who are without any legal proceedings, who are in difficult situations, and without a real international effort in order to support the Kurd authorities, but also and mainly to support the returns. Let's get quickly to the situation in the Ukraine. You've been to Moscow, you meet the officials, including Sergei Lavrov, the Minister of Foreign Affairs. All the efforts to create what we call humanitarian corridors are extremely difficult to implement. We're talking a lot about Mariupol, the Azovstal concern. Are you still concerned about the problems to implement humanitarian right in the Ukraine? Well, first I'd like to point at the fact that I went first to Kiev and then I went to Moscow. That's more than 6 weeks ago. Currently, I'd say two things. On the one hand, I'm slightly more optimistic because we succeeded during the past 6 weeks to accomplish and to widen our important operation in the Ukraine to meet the needs of the population by increasing our services to the displaced population for those who are impacted by the war, like the protected population, including the detained, the deads, and we are in a situation which is much better today. On the other hand, it is clear, and we see it every single day through what you are reporting, the situation in an active conflict remains extremely difficult, and there is an important number of population that we are at pain to reach, who have a problem to leave, to get out. The negotiations are complex because the reality on the ground is complex. You need an agreement of the military forces on both sides to have a mutual trust, to have evacuation and safe accesses. You have seen that we succeeded in some places, Mariupol, Sumy, and others, to accede to populations which are difficult to accede to. So we succeed in doing some things, but not enough, because trust between the parties is not there sufficiently enough to really create humanitarian corridors that will be more performing, more open, more safe for the population. Are you pointing at Moscow? We are pointing at no one. We try to negotiate in humanitarian diplomacy, quiet humanitarian diplomacy, with the parties to encourage those corridors and those evacuations, humanitarian evacuations, and to have the right to be respected. And you sometimes need key words and clear words in our conversations, but as you know, the ICRC will remain an organization privileging a diplomatic and confidential dialogue more than strong statement in the public space. Peter Maurer, thank you for having accepted this interview on France 24 from Geneva, and thank you for watching it. Stay tuned for more news.